That night is burned into my memory with a clarity that still makes my chest tighten whenever I close my eyes. My name is Sarah Miller, and I was 20 years old when my stepdad, Richard, tore the belt from his waist and swung it with the force of a man who believed pain was the only language worth speaking. The leather hissed through the air before slamming across my shoulder, and the sting was so sharp it felt like fire had been etched into my skin. I gasped and staggered backward, trying to shield myself, but he kept advancing, each strike harder than the one before. My arms trembled as I lifted them to block him, but the belt curled around my wrist and left angry welts that swelled instantly. I cried out for help, my voice breaking, echoing down the hallway of the house that never felt like a home. "Mom!" I screamed, my voice desperate. "Please make him stop." For a fraction of a second, I believed she would. My mother, Linda, stood only a few feet away in the doorway, her arms folded, her expression chillingly calm. She was the one person who should have pulled him away, the one person who should have thrown herself between us, but she did not move. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and then she spoke, her tone flat and cold, as if she were commenting on the weather. "Be grateful he feeds you." Those words struck harder than the belt. They carved into my chest like a blade. I stumbled, clutching my ribs where one of the strikes had landed, and stared at her in disbelief. My own mother was watching me crumble under the weight of Richard's violence, and she was siding with him. My knees buckled and I collapsed onto the wooden floor, the boards rough against my cheek, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The smell of leather sweat and dust filled my senses as the strikes continued. Richard's breath was heavy, his grunts filled with anger, each motion deliberate, as if he wanted not just to hurt me but to erase me. I tried to crawl, my fingertips brushing against the leg of my desk, but the belt lashed down across my back, and I cried out, my vision blurring with tears. The pain was sharp, but beneath it was a deeper ache, the kind that comes when you realize the two people who are supposed to protect you have instead become your jailers. I could feel my strength draining each blow, stealing the air from my lungs until all I could do was curl into myself and hope it ended soon. My body trembled and my lips split when I bit down hard to keep from screaming again. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth and my ears rang with the relentless sound of leather smacking flesh. I looked toward Linda one more time, hoping for even the faintest flicker of compassion, but her eyes were cold and distant. She tilted her head slightly, as if annoyed that I was disturbing her peace. That small gesture told me everything. There was no rescue coming from her. There never would be. Richard's voice thundered above me. "This is what happens when you think you can leave. You belong here. You will never walk away." His words were laced with rage and certainty, as though he had already won. Another strike landed across my ribs, and I felt something inside give way with a crack that sent shockwaves of pain radiating through my chest. My scream caught in my throat and dissolved into a wheeze as I fought for breath. My arms gave out and my legs refused to respond. Darkness crept in at the edges of my vision, swallowing the dim light of the room. My body was broken, my spirit crushed under their cruelty, but even as I lay there on the floor, my heart still clung to one thought. If I survived this night, I would not remain silent. The belt snapped once more, the sound reverberating like a gunshot, and then my body could no longer hold on. I collapsed fully, cheek pressed against the boards, tears soaking into the wood. My breaths came shallow and uneven, and the only thing anchoring me was the echo of my mother's words, repeating like a curse. "Be grateful he feeds you." Gratitude was the weapon she used to disguise neglect, the mask she wore while she abandoned me to his violence. In that moment, something inside me shattered beyond repair. I knew the girl who had begged for her mother's protection was gone. What remained was a woman forged in betrayal and pain, a woman who would rise not because of their care, but in spite of their cruelty. That night did not end me. That night created the person who is speaking these words now, and it is the story I will tell you from beginning to end, because silence is how abusers win, and breaking silence is how survivors fight back. Before Richard ever stepped into our lives, my world was built on the steady foundation of my father, Michael Miller. He was not wealthy or powerful, but he was the kind of man who carried warmth with him wherever he went. He worked long hours as a mechanic and came home smelling of oil and metal, yet his smile was always for me. I remember evenings when he would scoop me up into his arms, spinning me in the small living room until both of us were laughing too hard to breathe. On weekends, he would take me to the park, buy me ice cream, and sit patiently through every school play, even if my role was only a tree in the background. Those early years were filled with safety and joy, and I believed that was what family meant. My mother Linda in those days was different too. She was softer, more attentive. She worked part-time at a diner, and though money was always tight, she managed to keep the house filled with warmth. On Friday nights, she would pop popcorn and we would all watch movies together. On Sundays, we played board games, and at night, she tucked me in with a kiss on the forehead. My childhood until the age of 8 felt simple and whole. Then everything shattered in a single phone call. My father had been driving home late one evening when another car crossed the median and hit him head-on. The accident was brutal and he did not survive. I still remember the way my mother collapsed onto the kitchen floor when the police officer told her. I was too young to fully understand, but I knew life had just split into before and after. The weeks that followed blurred into images of funerals, whispered condolences, and a house that suddenly felt cavernous and hollow. I remember standing by my bedroom window waiting for his car to pull into the driveway even though I knew it never would. Nights became filled with my mother's muffled sobs through the walls, and I learned to tiptoe quietly so I would not disturb her grief. I tried to help in small ways, sweeping the floor, washing dishes, folding laundry, though my hands were clumsy. I wanted to be brave for her, and I thought if I smiled enough, maybe she would smile too. But nothing could fill the void he left. Still, in those years after his death, something unexpected happened. My mother and I grew closer. We were two people holding each other up against the world. She would squeeze my hand on the way to school and whisper, "We will be okay, Sarah." I believed her because I needed to. For 4 years we clung to each other, and even though money was short and her hours at the diner stretched late into the night, there was still a sense of being a team. She worked hard, and I studied harder because I wanted to make him proud, even though he was gone. I thought if I became strong and smart, maybe I could protect her the way he once protected us. That illusion of safety began to crumble when I turned 12. It was then that Richard appeared. He was a man my mother met through a friend at church. At first, he seemed charming. He brought flowers to the house and treated my mother with a kind of attention she had not known in years. He complimented her cooking, helped with repairs around the house, and told stories that made her laugh. For me, there was a cautious distance. I did not know what to think of him, but I wanted to see her happy. I told myself maybe this was a new beginning. Yet even in those early moments, I sensed something colder beneath the surface. His eyes lingered too long when he thought no one noticed. His tone was sharp when he corrected me on small things like not saying yes or fast enough. He seemed to study me as if calculating my weaknesses. My mother, though, was swept away by the relief of no longer carrying everything alone. Richard offered stability. He worked in construction and promised to provide for us. She wanted desperately to believe in him, and so did I, though deep down unease coiled in my stomach. Looking back, I see how grief and fear clouded her judgment. She was still mourning my father, but also terrified of raising me alone. Richard filled that void. He became the man of the house far too quickly, and I was expected to fall in line. At first, it was small things. He told me to watch my tone, to respect his authority, to do my chores faster. When I hesitated, he would look at my mother and she would nod as if silently telling me to obey. Soon, the small things became rules, and the rules became chains. But before those chains fully tightened, I still held on to the memory of my father. I remembered the way he would kneel down to meet my eyes when I was scared. I remembered him telling me I was smart and capable, and that I could do anything if I worked hard. Those memories became a private treasure I clung to whenever Richard's presence darkened the room. My father's death had left me vulnerable. My mother's loneliness opened the door. And Richard walked through it with a smile that promised safety but carried control. At 12, I could not yet see the full storm ahead. All I knew was that my life of laughter with my dad had ended and a new chapter with Richard was beginning. What I did not know then was that this man would turn our house into a prison and my mother into his accomplice. When Richard fully moved into our house, the atmosphere changed almost overnight. At first, it was subtle things that could almost be brushed off as quirks, but soon they grew into patterns that shaped every corner of our lives. He insisted on sitting at the head of the table every evening, and no one could start eating until he took the first bite. He demanded silence during meals, except when he asked a question, and if I forgot and spoke out of turn, his eyes would narrow with a warning that chilled me to my core. My mother, Linda, who once encouraged laughter at the dinner table, now looked at me sharply and said, "Listen to your stepfather, Sarah. He is only trying to make you disciplined." Those words felt foreign on her tongue, and yet she repeated them until they became normal in our house. Richard's control seeped into everything. When I was 13, he began monitoring what I wore. If a shirt was too bright or the sleeves too short, he would scowl and tell my mother that girls who dressed that way were looking for trouble. Linda would nod, and soon my wardrobe shrank to plain, dull colors that erased any spark of individuality. At 14, when my friends invited me to a sleepover, he said no outright. "You have responsibilities here," he declared, and my mother backed him up, saying we cannot risk you getting distracted by bad influences. I watched other girls laugh and share secrets while I sat alone in my room, staring at the ceiling, trying to imagine what freedom felt like. Richard also began to intrude into my privacy. He would knock once and enter my room without waiting for a response. Sometimes he rifled through my books and notebooks, pretending it was concern for what I was reading, but his eyes lingered too long, as if daring me to hide something. If he found a diary, he would read passages aloud, mocking my words, until I wished I had never written them. My mother, instead of stopping him, told me you should not write things you cannot defend. I felt the walls of our house tightening like a cage. By 15, the commands had grown harsher. Richard told me which chores to do and inspected them like a drill sergeant. If the floor was not spotless or a dish had a streak, he would lecture me for half an hour about how ungrateful I was. Sometimes he would flick me on the back of the head or shove me lightly against the counter, claiming it was just to teach me lessons. Linda no longer defended me at all. Instead, she began to echo his judgments. "Sarah, you need to be more respectful. Sarah, you should appreciate what he is doing for us." She had once been my ally, but now she stood shoulder to shoulder with him as though they were united in their mission to shape me into obedience. I learned to stay quiet and small, moving through the house carefully, as though every step might trigger an explosion. Yet deep inside, a spark of resistance grew. I remembered my father's gentle hands and his words that I could do anything. Those memories whispered to me that what Richard was doing was wrong, even if no one else admitted it. At school, I excelled in my studies, partly because books became my refuge. Teachers praised me for my focus, and classmates asked me for help on assignments. Those hours at school were the only times I felt like myself and not the version of me Richard and Linda demanded. But even that space was invaded. Richard began demanding to see my report cards, and if I had anything less than perfect marks, he accused me of wasting his generosity. "You live under my roof," he would remind me. "You eat my food. You better show me it is worth it." Linda always nodded in agreement. Gratitude became their weapon. It was not about love or care, but about reminding me that survival itself was something I owed them. The older I grew, the more Richard's mask slipped. At 13 and 14, it had been stern lectures and sharp words. By 15 and 16, his hand would grip my arm too hard, leaving faint bruises he dismissed as accidents. He would loom over me in the hallway, blocking my way until I admitted I was wrong even when I was not. I realized then that this was not just discipline, it was control crafted to crush me slowly. My mother's silence was perhaps worse than his rage. She no longer looked at me with softness. Instead, her eyes carried impatience as though my resistance was an inconvenience. Once, when I asked why she never defended me, she sighed and said, "Richard is the man of the house. Sarah, he knows best, and besides, he is feeding us, you should be grateful." That phrase carved itself deeper into my soul each time she said it. Gratitude was twisted into a chain, binding me to them. By the time I reached 16, I felt like a stranger in my own life. Richard controlled my clothes, my friends, my schedule, and even my tone of voice. If I laughed too loudly, he snapped at me. If I sighed, he accused me of being disrespectful. If I showed any spark of joy or individuality, it was stamped out. Yet I held on to small rebellions. I stayed late at the library pretending to study while secretly writing in hidden notebooks about my dreams. I saved small amounts of money from tutoring classmates and tucked it away in a hollowed book. Those acts felt tiny compared to the weight of their control, but they reminded me I was still me somewhere deep inside. Richard's arrival had turned our home from a place of safety into a prison, and my mother had become his accomplice. I did not yet know how far it would go or how violent it would become, but I knew this was only the beginning of a storm that would one day break over me. By the time I was 16, the atmosphere in our house was suffocating, and Richard's control was no longer hidden behind the pretense of discipline. It was open and constant, and it grew heavier each day. His voice became the law of the household and his hand the enforcer. What began as verbal lectures turned into physical intimidation. He would grab my wrist hard enough to leave red marks, or shove me into a wall when I answered too slowly. Once, when I dropped a plate, he backhanded me across the face so swiftly I barely registered the sting until my cheek burned and my eyes filled with tears. I looked to my mother expecting horror, but she only muttered, "You should not make him angry, Sarah," and walked away. That indifference cut deeper than his slap. At 17, the violence escalated further. Richard would corner me in the hallway, pressing his arm across my chest so that I could not move until I apologized for some imagined slight. If I tried to resist, he would dig his fingers into my shoulder until I cried out. He seemed to feed on my fear and my submission. Linda reinforced his behavior by repeating her mantra of gratitude. "You have food. Sarah, you have a roof over your head. You need to appreciate what you are given." Each time she said it, I felt my identity slipping away piece by piece. Yet inside me, a quiet rebellion took root. I began documenting everything in secret. I kept a notebook hidden beneath a loose floorboard where I recorded each incident in detail. The dates, the words he used, the bruises I discovered in the mirror. Sometimes I sketched the shapes of the marks so I would not forget. I stole an old phone from a friend who no longer needed it and used it to take pictures of my arms and legs when the bruises were fresh. I hid the phone in a hollow book I had bought at a thrift store, and I wore the tiny key to the notebook on a chain under my shirt. These small acts of preservation felt like lifelines. They reminded me that I was not crazy, that the pain was real, and that maybe one day I would have proof strong enough that no one could deny it. Richard must have sensed my growing defiance because his watchfulness intensified. He started checking my drawers and reading my messages whenever I left my phone unattended. He accused me of keeping secrets and betrayal. Once, he ripped up a letter from a classmate congratulating me on winning a school essay contest and sneered, "So you think you are smarter than everyone else." I learned to mask my hope and bury my ambitions deep where he could not reach them. School became my sanctuary. Teachers praised my essays, and classmates admired my determination. For a few hours each day, I felt normal. I laughed with friends and dreamed about college far away where I could finally breathe. But as soon as I stepped through the door at home, the world inverted. Smiles were arrogance, sighs were disrespect, and achievement was rebellion. The whiplash between school and home nearly broke me, but it also fueled my determination. I began researching scholarships and financial aid during stolen hours in the library. I told myself that if I could just survive until graduation, I could escape. Every day became a delicate performance. At home, I moved silently, obeying Richard's rules, and at school, I quietly built a plan for freedom. Still, the violence followed me like a shadow. Some nights, Richard would storm into my room drunk and furious over something trivial like the way I folded laundry. He would yank me out of bed by my arm and strike me with his belt while Linda stood in the doorway, arms crossed, repeating her chilling refrain. "Be grateful he feeds you." Those words carved into my heart, and each repetition strengthened my resolve that one day I would expose them both. My rebellion grew more strategic. I recorded the sound of Richard's shouting on a cheap recorder I bought with saved money. I wrote essays in code about freedom and resilience, which my teachers praised without knowing they were my survival strategies. I saved every dollar I earned from tutoring underclassmen and hid it away in envelopes inside textbooks. I imagined the day when I would step onto a bus or train and never look back. Yet even as I planned, the danger grew. Abusers sense when control is slipping, and Richard's suspicion became relentless. He grilled me about where I went after school. He demanded to see my homework and accused me of hiding things when he found nothing. One evening, when I came home late from the library, he shoved me against the wall and pressed his face close to mine, hissing, "If you ever try to leave, we will make sure you regret it." His words sent ice through my veins, but inside, a voice whispered not forever. Not forever. At 17, I felt like a prisoner rehearsing escape plans in my mind as if they were fairy tales. If I could just get to another city, I thought maybe I could study in peace. Maybe I could laugh without fear. My journals became more than survival. They became seeds of the future. I detailed my dreams of walking across a campus, of seeing my name on a scholarship letter, of being free. I clung to those dreams when the belt left bruises, when Linda's voice dismissed my pain, and when the silence of the house pressed against my chest. The escalation of violence was undeniable, but so was the growth of my resistance. Each bruise was matched by a hidden note, each insult by a plan scrawled in secret. Richard wanted to crush me. Linda wanted me submissive, but in their attempt to break me, they forged something stronger. By the time I turned 18, the line between survival and rebellion was razor thin. I knew one wrong move could end with me collapsed on the floor again, yet I also knew that if I gave up entirely, I would disappear. I lived suspended between terror and hope, caught in a storm that only grew darker, but carrying within me the ember of defiance that refused to die. When I turned 18, a fragile hope began to take shape in my hands. After years of secret planning, my essays and grades finally paid off, and I received a letter of acceptance from a university in another state, along with a scholarship that would cover tuition. I clutched the envelope as if it were a lifeline, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a future where Richard's voice did not dictate my every move, and where my mother's cold eyes no longer measured my worth. I waited for the right moment to tell them, hoping foolishly that somewhere inside Linda might feel pride or even relief that her daughter had a chance at something better. When I finally sat at the kitchen table and said the words, I got in Richard's face hardened instantly. His jaw clenched and he snatched the letter from my hands. He read it aloud in a mocking tone, twisting each line into an insult. "So you think you are better than us?" he spat. "You think some piece of paper means you can survive out there alone." Before I could respond, he tore the letter into shreds and let the pieces scatter onto the floor. My mother did not protest. Instead, she added her own knife to the wound. "Sarah, this family needs you. You will stay here and help. That scholarship is just a distraction." Her words echoed with betrayal. I had imagined she might remember the dreams she once held for herself, but instead, she chained me to the prison she had built. That night, I cried silently into my pillow, holding the shredded pieces of the acceptance letter. My chest ached with grief, but beneath it simmered anger. I told myself they could destroy paper, but not the knowledge I had earned, nor the determination I carried. I would apply again. I would hide the next letter better. I would find a way out. But Richard seemed to sense that spark of rebellion, and his suspicion grew sharper. He prowled around me like a predator waiting for weakness. If I lingered too long in my room, he burst in demanding to know what I was hiding. If I spent extra time at the library, he accused me of lying. Once he grabbed my bag and dumped it out, scattering pens, notebooks, and papers across the floor. He rifled through them until he found an essay draft about resilience. He read it aloud in a sneer, then ripped it in half. My mother stood by silently, and when I begged her to stop him, she said only, "He is trying to keep you grounded, Sarah." I felt a scream rise inside me, but I swallowed it. To argue was to invite violence, and I needed to save my strength for the moment that truly mattered. That summer before my 20th birthday, the tension in the house was unbearable. Every word felt like a trigger, every step a test. Richard's eyes followed me constantly, and Linda's silence was suffocating. Yet even then, I continued my small rebellions. I applied for financial aid on the library computer, and I saved the confirmation pages in a hidden folder. I counted the money I had tucked away in hollow books, now nearly enough for a bus ticket. At night, I rehearsed my escape plan over and over. I pictured myself boarding a bus with a backpack, slipping away into a city where no one knew my name, and starting again. The dream was fragile, but it kept me breathing. Then, one evening, as the air hung heavy with summer heat, Richard stormed into my room and found me filling out financial forms. The papers were spread across my desk, glowing in the lamplight. His eyes narrowed and his face twisted with rage. "What is this?" he demanded, snatching up the forms. My voice trembled, but I forced myself to answer. "I am applying for aid. I want to go to school." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then he erupted. "You are not leaving. You are nothing without this family." His words crashed over me, and before I could move, he shoved the papers against my chest, crumpling them. Linda appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, her face cold as stone. She did not ask what was happening. She did not defend me. Instead, she delivered the sentence that sealed my fate. "Sarah, you will not embarrass us by running away. You will stay here." Her voice was calm, final, as though she were closing a door on my future. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks of the house. Every sound made me flinch, every shadow felt heavy. I thought of my father and how different life had been when he was alive. I thought of the acceptance letter torn to shreds, the essays ripped apart, the money hidden in books. Rage and sorrow battled inside me until my chest ached. I knew something was building, something darker than all the nights before. Richard had caught a glimpse of my dream, and now he would do everything to crush it. I did not yet know how violent it would become, but I felt it in my bones. The storm was coming. The night it finally happened began quietly, as if the house itself were holding its breath. I sat at my small desk, papers spread across the surface, the glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the walls. In my hands was another set of forms I had managed to print at the library earlier that day, a desperate second attempt at securing financial aid. My acceptance letter had been destroyed, but I refused to let that stop me. The hum of the cicadas outside the window was the only sound until the door burst open with such force it rattled the frame. Richard stood there filling the doorway with his bulk, the smell of beer clinging to him. His eyes burned with fury as he spotted the papers. Without a word, he strode forward and snatched them from the desk, his fingers crushing the pages. "What is this?" he barked. I swallowed hard, my voice trembling but steady enough to answer. "I want to go to school, Richard. I deserve a chance." His face twisted into something monstrous. "Deserve," he repeated as if the word itself offended him. "You think you are better than us. You think you can walk away." My mother appeared behind him in the hallway, her arms folded, her face expressionless. I looked at her, hoping for even a flicker of support, but she only tilted her head slightly, as if waiting to see how this played out. Richard's hand shot to his waist, and in one swift motion, he ripped the belt free. The sound of leather sliding through the loops sent a shiver down my spine. He held it loosely at first, letting it swing from his hand like a snake. "You cannot stop me," I whispered, though fear clutched at my throat. His laugh was low and cruel. "Watch me," he said, and then the belt cracked through the air. The first strike landed across my shoulder, sending pain radiating down my arm. I gasped, stumbling back against the desk. The second blow struck my ribs, knocking the breath from me. The third wrapped around my forearm when I tried to shield myself, leaving a welt that throbbed instantly. I screamed, hoping someone might hear through the thin walls, but the house swallowed the sound as it always had. Richard advanced with relentless fury, each strike harder than the last. My vision swam as tears blurred my eyes. I tried to crawl toward the bed, but the belt lashed across my back, driving me down to the floor. My cheek pressed against the boards, cold and rough beneath me. Blood filled my mouth where I had bitten my lip. My breaths came in shallow gasps, and still the blows fell. I looked up one last time toward my mother. "Mom, please help me," I begged, my voice breaking. But Linda did not move. Her eyes were cold, her lips pressed into that thin, familiar line. When she finally spoke, her words sliced deeper than the belt itself. "Be grateful he feeds you." The betrayal stole the last thread of hope from me. I realized in that moment that I was utterly alone. Richard seized the moment, wrapping the belt around his hand for a tighter grip. He swung with renewed force. Another strike slammed across my ribs, and I felt something crack sharp pain exploding in my chest. My scream dissolved into a wheeze. My arms slackened and my legs refused to respond. Darkness crept in at the edges of my vision. He yanked me up by the arm, twisting until I thought the bone would snap. "This is what happens when you defy us," he spat before shoving me against the wall. My head struck the plaster and stars burst across my vision. I clawed at the floor, reaching for my phone that had slid under the bed, but Richard kicked it away. "You do not need anyone else," he growled. "We are all you have." Another lash came down across my back and then across my legs until I collapsed fully. My body was no longer mine. It was pain and darkness and ringing in my ears. Through the haze, I saw Linda still standing, still watching, as if my suffering were nothing more than background noise. "Mom, please," I whispered, though my voice was barely audible. She did not answer. Richard raised the belt one final time and brought it down with such force that my body gave out completely. My cheek pressed against the floorboards, my breaths shallow and ragged. The room tilted, spinning away from me. The last thing I heard before the darkness swallowed me was his voice, low and triumphant. "You will never leave." Then silence. When I opened my eyes again, the world was blurry and foreign. Bright white lights pierced through my vision and the steady beeping of a machine filled the room. My body felt as if it had been set on fire, then crushed under a heavy weight. Every rib ached, every limb felt leaden. I tried to move, but a sharp pain shot through my chest, forcing a cry from my throat. A nurse appeared quickly, placing a hand on my shoulder, her voice calm and steady. "You are safe. Sarah, you are in the hospital. Do not try to move too quickly." The word safe barely registered. How could I be safe when the people who hurt me were the ones who were supposed to love me? Memories rushed back with brutal clarity. The belt snapping against my skin, the floor rising to meet my face, my mother's voice telling me to be grateful. My eyes filled with tears. The nurse squeezed my hand gently and said, "You have injuries that will take time to heal: 2 cracked ribs, deep bruising, and signs of older trauma. We have contacted the authorities to ensure your safety." Her words blurred together, but the phrase older trauma echoed in my mind. She had seen what I had tried so hard to hide for years. A doctor approached, clipboard in hand. "Sarah, I am Dr. Patel. You were brought here by ambulance after a neighbor called the police. They heard screaming, and when officers arrived, they found you unconscious with severe injuries. You are stable now, but we need to talk about what happened." My chest tightened, fear and shame wrestling inside me. For years, I had hidden the truth, convinced silence was the only way to survive. But now, with machines tracking my heartbeat and strangers treating wounds inflicted by my own family, silence felt like complicity. My lips trembled as I whispered, "My stepdad did this. He beat me with a belt, and my mother watched." Dr. Patel's eyes softened with compassion. "We will document everything he said. The police are waiting to take your statement when you are ready. You are not alone in this, not anymore." When the officers entered, one of them, Officer Ramirez, spoke gently, as if he were afraid I might break again. "Sarah, can you tell us what happened tonight?" My voice faltered but grew steadier as I described the confrontation over my college plans, the first strike of the belt, the relentless beating, and the moment my mother uttered those cruel words. The officer's jaw tightened, and he exchanged a grim look with his partner. "We have taken Richard into custody," he told me. "Your mother is also under investigation. There is strong evidence of long-term abuse." Relief and disbelief surged together in my chest. Someone finally believed me. Someone was finally holding them accountable. Later, as night gave way to morning, I lay in the hospital bed listening to the rhythmic beeping of the machines. Every inhale reminded me of fractured ribs. Every exhale carried both pain and release. For the first time, the weight of truth was not on me alone. Others knew now. There was evidence beyond my word. That afternoon, a woman named Karen arrived, a social worker assigned to my case. She had kind eyes and a firm voice. "Sarah, you are very brave. What happened to you was not your fault. We are here to help you, but this is a process. There will be investigations hearings, maybe even a trial. Are you willing to cooperate?" My first instinct was to hide, to retreat into silence, but then I remembered Richard's voice, "You will never leave," and my mother's betrayal. I forced myself to nod. "Yes, I will cooperate." Karen's lips curved into a small smile. "Good," she said. "This is the first step toward reclaiming your life." Over the next days, the hospital room became both sanctuary and battleground. Doctors treated my injuries, nurses monitored my progress, investigators photographed every bruise, every welt, every scar. They documented the older injuries that had faded but not disappeared. My journals, which the police retrieved from under the floorboard, became crucial evidence. For the first time, my words were not dismissed as childish complaints. They were proof. Neighbors testified that they had heard shouting and doors slamming for years. One even produced a recording capturing my screams and Richard's voice during the attack. The walls of secrecy were crumbling piece by piece. I should have felt only relief, but grief mixed with it. Grief for the father I had lost. Grief for the mother who had chosen cruelty over compassion. Grief for the years stolen by fear. At night, I cried quietly into my hospital pillow, wondering if I would ever feel whole again. Yet each morning I woke still breathing, still fighting, and that was a kind of victory. Dr. Patel told me, "Your body will heal, though the pain may linger. The deeper wounds will take longer." Therapy support groups building a community outside the shadows of your past will help. You have already taken the hardest step by speaking the truth. His words planted seeds of hope inside me. Perhaps there was a future beyond this. Perhaps I could live not defined by cruelty, but by choice. 3 months later, I stood outside the courthouse, my ribs still tender beneath my blouse, my heart pounding as cameras clicked and voices murmured around me. For so long, my pain had been hidden behind the walls of our house, and now the truth was about to be displayed for the world to see. Karen, the social worker, stood beside me, her hand steady on my shoulder. "Sarah, you are ready," she whispered. "Do not let their presence intimidate you. You have the truth, the evidence, and your voice." I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. Inside the courtroom, Richard sat at the defense table dressed in a suit that could not disguise the coldness in his eyes. His jaw was tight, his expression defiant. Next to him sat my mother, Linda, her hair neatly styled, her lips pursed as if she were the one suffering injustice. She refused to look at me instead, fixing her gaze on the table. Seeing them together made my stomach twist, but I lifted my head and walked to the prosecutor's table. Ms. Daniels, the prosecutor, was sharp-eyed and calm. She told me our case was strong. We had photographs of my injuries, medical reports, neighbors' testimonies, my journals, and the recording of my screams. Richard's history of aggression was clear, and Linda's neglect undeniable. Still sitting across from them made me feel like a child again, powerless and small. But this time, I was not alone. The proceedings began with opening statements. Ms. Daniels told the jury, "This is not discipline gone too far. This is prolonged abuse committed by a stepfather who believed he had the right to control and harm his stepdaughter, supported by a mother who chose silence over protection." The defense attorney rose next, painting me as unstable, rebellious, and manipulative. He claimed Richard had only tried to restrain me when I became hysterical, that my journals were fabricated, that Linda was a struggling mother doing her best. His words stung, but I gripped the bench and reminded myself the truth endures. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand, heart pounding. I swore to tell the truth and looked directly at the jury. My voice shook at first, but steadied as I described the years of control, the gaslighting, the constant erosion of freedom. I recounted the night of the beating, every lash of the belt, every plea for help, the exact words my mother spoke. "Be grateful he feeds you." Gasps rippled through the room. The prosecutor showed photographs of my bruises, medical reports, and played the neighbor's recording. The sound of my screams echoed, followed by Richard's voice. Several jurors shifted uncomfortably, one woman wiped away tears. The defense attorney tried to rattle me during cross-examination. "Is it not true you resented your stepfather?" he pressed. "Did you not want to leave your family and exaggerate your story?" I took a deep breath before answering. "I resented the abuse," I said firmly. "I wanted to leave because I deserved a life free of fear, My journals were not fabricated, they were survival. He raised his voice, but I refused to falter. When Linda took the stand, my stomach knotted. She looked smaller than usual, her voice trembling. At first, she tried to defend herself, saying Richard had acted out of stress, and she had been powerless, but under cross-examination, her mask cracked. Ms. Daniels asked, "Is it true you often said, 'Be grateful he feeds you,' when Sarah protested?" Linda hesitated, then whispered yes. "Is it true you saw Richard hit Sarah and chose not to intervene?" Her lips pressed tight, then she nodded. The jury watched her crumble. For years, she had dismissed me. Now she was admitting the truth under oath. Witnesses testified next. Neighbors described years of shouting and violence. One woman said she saw me with bruises on my arms and legs as a teenager. Dr. Patel testified about my injuries, explaining that the cracked ribs and deep welts could not have been self-inflicted. The evidence was overwhelming. Richard sat rigid, glaring at me, but for once he could not silence me. The trial lasted a week, but each day felt endless. When closing arguments came, Ms. Daniels spoke with quiet force. Abuse thrives in silence. Sarah Miller broke that silence. She deserves justice. The defense tried to portray Richard as misunderstood and Linda as overwhelmed, but the weight of evidence was undeniable. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours before returning with their verdict. Guilty of aggravated assault. Guilty of domestic violence. Guilty of child endangerment for Linda. Relief washed over me so strong my knees almost buckled. Tears filled my eyes as I clutched Karen's hand. For the first time in my life, the truth had not been buried, it had been acknowledged. At sentencing, the judge spoke directly to Richard and Linda. "This court has seen many cases of violence, but few as chilling as this, where family bonds were twisted into weapons. Richard Miller, you are sentenced to 15 years in state prison. Linda Miller, you are sentenced to 3 years for child endangerment and will undergo mandatory counseling." As they were led away, Richard glared at me with unrepentant rage, but Linda's eyes dropped to the floor, her shoulders slumping. I sat in the courtroom scarred but free. Justice had been served and silence had lost its power. In the weeks after the trial, I felt as though I were walking on unsteady ground. The weight of years of fear had lifted, but what remained was a hollow ache I did not know how to fill. My body still carried the marks of what had been done to me, and my mind replayed the echoes of leather snapping against skin and my mother's voice telling me to be grateful. Healing did not arrive like a sudden sunrise, it crept slowly like dawn breaking through storm clouds. The hospital released me to a small, safe apartment arranged through a local shelter. Karen visited, often checking on my progress, reminding me that I was not alone. She connected me with a therapist, Dr. Harris, whose silver-streaked hair and calm presence steadied me. In our sessions, I unraveled memories knotted tight with fear. I spoke about the bruises, about the nights of silence, about the betrayal of hearing my mother's words over and over. Dr. Harris listened without judgment and said, "Sarah, trauma is not only what happened to you, it is what lingers inside long after. Healing is not about erasing, it is about reclaiming your story." At first, her words seemed impossible. I woke at night shaking, drenched in sweat, convinced I heard Richard's footsteps outside my door. Sometimes I woke gasping with the phantom sting of the belt across my back. But instead of hiding under blankets, I followed her advice. I lit a candle, I opened my journal, and I wrote affirmations. I am more than what was done to me. I deserve love. I deserve safety. Each time the nightmares came, I fought them with words, and slowly they lost some of their power. Karen also introduced me to a support group for survivors of family abuse. Walking into that room for the first time felt terrifying. Faces of strangers turned toward me, each carrying their own scars, visible and invisible. But as they shared their stories, I felt less alone. We cried together, laughed hesitantly, and slowly began to build trust. One woman said our abusers tried to convince us we were nothing, but every day we wake up, we prove them wrong. Her words etched themselves into my heart. My body, too, needed healing. Physical therapy sessions helped me regain strength in my ribs and shoulders. Each careful stretch, each small step forward felt like reclaiming territory stolen from me. The therapist encouraged me to celebrate progress. Today you lifted your arm higher. Today you walked farther. Small victories added up until I began to believe in the possibility of wholeness. Beyond therapy, I started to rebuild a life that felt like my own. I enrolled in community college, choosing courses in psychology and writing. Learning about the human mind helped me understand my own scars, and writing gave me a way to transform pain into something that could not control me anymore. My professors praised my honesty and insight. One told me, "Sarah, your words carry weight. They can help others who are lost in silence." That idea rooted itself in me. Perhaps my story was not only for me. Perhaps it could light a path for others. I began volunteering at the shelter that had given me refuge. The first time I read to a group of children, their eyes wide with both fear and hope, I felt my voice tremble, but as they leaned closer to listen, I realized it was stronger than my fear. Week after week, I served meals, comforted mothers, and offered hugs to children whose pain mirrored mine. In giving comfort, I found pieces of my own healing. Yet recovery was not a straight line. Some days I felt strong, other days broken. Anniversaries triggered waves of sorrow. Sometimes I heard Richard's voice in my mind or saw Linda's cold eyes in dreams. On those days, Dr. Harris reminded me healing is not about never falling. It is about rising each time. You have already proven you can rise. My relationship with faith shifted as well. As a child, I had prayed for protection that never came. As an adult, I began to see faith not as waiting for rescue, but as discovering strength within myself. Lighting candles, meditating, writing prayers became rituals of survival. I thanked the universe for survival, for allies, for a second chance. I asked not for an easy road, but for courage to walk it. Slowly, I reconnected with family who had once distanced themselves from our household chaos. My aunt visited tears in her eyes as she hugged me tightly. "Sarah, I should have been there. I am so sorry." For the first time in years, I felt warmth that did not burn. We cooked together, laughed, and remembered my father before everything fractured. Rebuilding those ties gave me hope that not all family was poison. Perhaps I could create new bonds rooted in love and respect. As months passed, I grew stronger, not just physically, but emotionally. I celebrated small milestones, sleeping through the night, laughing without guilt, applying for scholarships. One evening, I stood by my apartment window, watching city lights glow, and realized the silence around me felt different. It was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful. It was mine. Healing was not the end of my story, but the middle, a place where scars and strength coexisted. I carried the past, but it no longer defined me. 2 years after the night Richard's belt came down on my skin and my mother told me to be grateful, I found myself standing on a stage in a small community center. The room was filled with survivors, advocates, and neighbors who had gathered for a charity event supporting the shelter where I volunteered. My palms were damp and my heart pounded, but when I looked out at the expectant faces, something stirred inside me. For so long, my voice had been silenced, but now people wanted to hear it. I took a deep breath and began. "My name is Sarah Miller, and for years, my home was not a place of safety, but of pain. My stepfather beat me. My mother ignored my cries. They told me to be grateful while they tore me down. But tonight, I am standing here alive, free, and unashamed." The room fell silent as I shared my journey from bruises to courtroom, from nightmares to healing. I spoke of the journals I had hidden, of the night I collapsed on the floor of the trial where I faced my abusers, and of the day justice was served. When I finished, the audience rose to their feet. The applause thundered, and I realized they were not just acknowledging my survival, they were witnessing my transformation. That night, the community center asked me to lead writing workshops for survivors, teaching them how to turn pain into words that could set them free. Watching their pens move across paper, seeing relief in their eyes, filled me with purpose. Each story was a declaration of existence, a refusal to be erased. Outside the shelter, I pursued my education with determination. With scholarships and part-time jobs, I earned a degree in social work. Balancing classes, work, and recovery was never easy, but every exam I passed felt like reclaiming a piece of the life stolen from me. On graduation day, as I walked across the stage, I imagined Richard in prison and Linda in counseling. Their worlds had shrunk while mine had expanded. Resolution did not come only from achievements, though. It came in small moments, too, like cooking dinner in my apartment without flinching at the sound of metal, or laughing with friends without fearing punishment. It was learning to trust again, to let people close without expecting betrayal. Sometimes I wondered about Linda. I heard she was released after serving part of her sentence and had entered counseling. A part of me still ached for the mother I wished I had, but I no longer craved her approval. Whether she changed or not was her path. Mine was to live freely, to continue healing, to keep helping others. As for Richard, I knew he would remain behind bars for many years. The thought of him still unsettled me, but his power was gone. His violence had been exposed, and I had survived. That was my victory. One evening, I sat by my window with a cup of tea, reflecting on how far I had come. The girl who once cowered under the belt was gone. In her place stood a woman who had faced the worst and refused to break. Resolution was not about forgetting, it was about transformation. My scars were still there, but they were part of a larger story, one of survival and renewal. I understood now that silence nearly destroyed me, but speaking saved me, and my voice no longer belonged only to me. It belonged to every person still trapped in the dark, waiting for proof that survival was possible.